I speak about letter writing, like handwritten letters because of Dear Dana. But I want to write a humorous historical fiction book. So that's probably my next chapter. That's what I'm working on right now, but just I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continue to write and to see where that creativity takes me.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter of the podcast, where we get to talk to great authors from around the world. And I love when an author writes about a time period that I know well. And I realize how old I'm getting when I read about how things used to be. And Amy's written a great book. She's got a lot of humor and a great insight into where we've come from. And maybe for those who haven't grown up in that generation, maybe you're learning that you can understand what life was like back in the day. But I'm so glad to have Amy here on the show. Amy, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm really excited to be here.
This is great. Tell everybody, Amy, let's start off right off the bat where you are in this big world of ours.
Right. I am in Tomball, Texas, which is northwest of Houston, the Houston metropolitan area. So
nice.
Mm-hmm.
And Texas is nice this time of year, spring.
Oh, this is the time. This is the time to be in Houston because it's between, when it was kind of cold and before we enter this, where we're the surface of the sun. So, it's the sweet spot. So if you were going to come to Houston, I'd recommend February through April or early May.
All right. I'm going to start packing right now. I'll see you in a minute.
Okay,
so
great.
I'm on my way because it's still spring in Canada, but it's not like spring. I'm still wearing a sweater. Like, come on, let's move forward here, everybody. It should be warm now. Your journey as an author and everything that you've been up to, can you kind of take us back to, like, how did this even start for you so that you and I could have this conversation today? What was the beginning for you?
Well, and I, like many other people, I didn't come to writing directly. I got a business degree. I spent years working in purchasing. And then in our 30s, my husband's employer, we both moved up the ranks, and they said, do you want to go to the UK for 3 years? And we thought, oh, wow. What an adventure we could have. And so we had one kid at the time. We went over, and this sounds so, like this is an obvious statement, but so I didn't have a work visa, so I wasn't going to work. So I left my job, which was a sacrifice, but we thought, the opportunity to travel we were pretty young to be able to do that. So I got there and I was like, wait a second, the kid went off to school. And I was like, wait a second, what am I going to do with all this time? So I went to the university and took history classes, but that wasn't enough. And I'd always written on the side. I'd written short stories. I was the person at work who would read my emails back and think about how profoundly moving they were about Chardonnay or about, the company picnic, how that made everyone laugh. And so I was like, I just started writing. And then I realized it was the beginning of it was just when the high-speed internet happened. I was like, wait, I could create a space here. I didn't realize people would pay me to write. And then I realized, it took me a long time to take myself seriously, but it was desperation. I was desperate. And so I wrote. I didn't know anyone in England. The phone numbers were too long. We were driving on the wrong side of the road. So I became an author. So by the time we got back, I was pregnant with our second kid. I had more time. I created this little niche for myself where I replaced most of my income. And my first real gig was writing about American college football. And that led to the books. And it led to me taking myself seriously enough. And then that's how I became an author.
American college football.
Right.
Seems to be an interesting step from where you are to where you are now. Like,
right.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And then that was kind of my bread and butter. I love sports. That's kind of my whole life. And so that was something to engage with, my passion. And I'm a woman, so that made it easier for me to create the niche. And also I was a bigger target at that point, too, at the beginning, especially. But yeah.
It's amazing. I love hearing somebody's journey to get to where they are, because we see a book on a shelf and we go, looks easy, right? Just write a book, put it on the shelf and sell it. That seems easy, but no. There's a whole story behind every author and their journey. Right?
And I would have never thought I would have had a book, much less two. It's a plot twist for me, for sure. And it's like I just lived the dream without planning it, without, and I've fought off a little bit of, and I think a lot of people have this, the imposter syndrome. That's the official word. But I've sat in a lot of spaces where I've been like, I don't belong here because I wasn't trained professionally to do this. I kind of fell upon it, but I think it makes it even more satisfying to have, have the books and, get to talk about them.
So let's create this scenario here. You've been asked to be a keynote speaker at a conference for authors, a bunch of eager new authors in the audience, pen and paper in hand, ready to write down anything they can take back to their writing after the conference. You're on stage. What's your topic? What do you want to tell the writers in the room?
Oh boy. Well, I think I would, given that opportunity, I would share my journey, and my topic would be how to get out of your own way, how to get out of your own way and find your voice, without trying to compare it to everyone else's, and I think I would speak to that just on my personal experience, which I could speak to with great passion, and try to impart on the other fellow authors that, that's the biggest hurdle they're going to have to face, is getting out of their own way and trying to do it the way everyone else says it has to be done, not just trusting themselves. Because I think creatively, that's what you have to do. I know you're a musician, and I think all those creative spots share that, you have to find your approach, and then you have to trust it.
It's interesting when you talk about music. For me, I'm a guitar player, and when I see a really good guitar player who's like a master at what they do, I have two responses. Either I'm going to give up and sell all my guitars because there's no way I'm going to be like them, or I'm going to be inspired enough to go home and start working on my craft because I see something in them that I don't have, that I long for, and it makes me want to work harder. So I think for authors, maybe the same thing. They see an author and they're like, oh, look at the success for this person. They got 80 books. I can't even get a chapter out. And like, I give up, right? And it's like, it could be something that brings the best of you out, right?
Well, I think that's incredible. I want to think about that and write it down, because it's like you're at a crossroads. Then what do you do with that? Like you said, you either give up and sell your typewriter and, go back to what you were doing, or you use it as inspiration and motivation. That's beautiful. Very inspiring.
There you go. Yeah. I like putting you in the context of speaking on stage, because it kind of pulls from your wisdom and knowledge and what you are living right now. And I think that anything we can do to help a fellow author in our conversation helps bring the next group behind us that are thinking about being in your seat one day, and all the great opportunities that are coming your way because you're a writer. I think I just want to encourage that listener, that reader, and that author as well.
Right. No, I think that's great. And I think that, I look for that myself, even in my own journey. I'm still, you still look for that encouragement and inspiration. And I think that's the other message. So even when you've achieved whatever it is you're going after, then you go through that whole cycle again,
You talked about getting the things that are in your way and getting around those. What was in your way as an early author, early in your journey? What was some of the roadblocks for you?
Well, I think taking myself seriously enough to let myself write that story. Yeah. And, it reminds me of, because I kept thinking, and the time travel book, that I kept telling myself, it's silly. It's kind of a silly little story you want to tell, but the idea I had kicking around in my head for years that this is what I want to write about. But I thought, we all think, who's going to read that? Who's going to listen to that? But also, like, what good? Some funny book about going back to 1978. What is that? What is that going to do out in the world? And then it's futile, because you can sit and write these chapters, but you have these kids and a husband and a writing job. You're wasting your time doing this. But letting myself just do it with no promise of anything happening, and then trusting that passion I had, could be shared with someone else, shared with the world, could be made into a book. Just trusting that, and all those hurdles, and most of them are mental. This is stupid. You can't do it. You can't write a book. That's a dumb topic. And just trying to just believe your own stuff just long enough to write one more sentence, one more page, and then you look back after a year or so and you're like, holy smokes, I wrote a book. It's magical.
Exactly. It is. So before we talk about the newest book, can we just jump back to your other one, Dear Dana? Can you tell us a little bit about that book as well? Because when I have listeners, they say, Dave, if the author has more than one book, can you please tell us? Because we want to fall in love with everything they're working on. We have your website, which we'll talk about later, where everything's listed. But just an overview of Dear Dana before we get into your new work.
Yeah, Dear Dana is a story that happened to me as opposed to a story I kind of made up. And Dear Dana was Basically, it chronicles this amazing story where I got on Facebook one day, reconnected with an old friend from a summer camp, found out her young son had cancer, started supporting them from afar, not being involved, not commenting, not liking anything. But then when the child he went into remission, and then the cancer came back. I was sitting at my desk writing about American college football, and it was like a lightning bolt hit them. I thought, I'm going to write them supportive notes and cards and send them to this hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where this kid was struggling for his life, basically. And I hadn't written anybody a letter in probably 25 years at the time. And I hadn't had any contact with her in 30 years, zero, never met the kid. And why I thought that this was just the universe, urging me to do this. And so I started writing them letters every week, thinking about you, praying for you, keep fighting. And then after about 10 weeks of writing the two of them, unthinkably, the kid loses his battle. His name was Parker. He dies. And I was like, well, what do I do now? Not that it had anything to do with me. And I was like, well, I'm just crazy enough to think I ought to keep writing her. So I just kept writing her. And this time I stalked her husband's law office address in Louisiana, started sending the letters. And this story is really about me being crazy at different levels. And so I just keep writing her, and I don't even know why I'm writing her. Every time I sit down to write her, I think that's ridiculous. She's lost her son. What are you doing? But I couldn't stop myself. So I wrote her probably for 4 months. And then every week I thought, I'm going to stop doing it because what is this even doing? And then magically, it was on my birthday, about 5 months into this, she writes me back this 10-page letter about her grief, about her life. And this kicks off, Dave, 2 years of us communicating exclusively through the U.S. mail.
Wow.
And it changed the way I looked at everything because I realized I didn't care how she voted. I didn't know anything about her religious stance or anything. All I knew is I cared about this person, and we were sharing these letters that crossed. We could say whatever we wanted to because I didn't know when she read what I read. I didn't feel like I had to respond to everything, but I cared about her on a level that made no sense. We trusted each other, and it kind of just pivoted my perspective on my life. And I thought, if this one random girl on this Facebook friends list could impact my life this way, what would happen if I connected in a similar way with all these other people? So I decided I'm going to write all these people a letter. I got stationery. I shoved everybody's name into a box, and I went on this. I never really thought I was going to finish. I didn't think I was going to get past 10 letters. But once I started doing it, I was like, oh my God, this is probably the most important thing I'm ever going to do. So it took me 18 months, and I wrote 580 people handwritten letters.
Wow.
And it blew up my life. And so the book, Dear Dana, it has the longest subtitle in publishing history. That time I went crazy and wrote all 580 of my Facebook friends a handwritten letter, chronicles the pen paling with Dana, the story of Parker, and then just the takeaways, just with snippets of the letters between me and these 580. And as it turned out, Dave, they were all real human beings living messy, screwed up, amazing lives. And they'd all impacted me in some way. It just was absolutely life-changing.
I can tell from your voice you have zero passion for this project.
Yeah.
Everything is exuding from you.
Yeah.
You just light up talking about this. I love this.
Right. It's an incredible story that happened to me, and I never intended to write a book about it, but I realized that the universe or God, or however you want to frame it, gave me this story to share with the rest of the world. And I feel like that's part of what I'm supposed to do. So.
Wow. What's the time frame between Dear Dana and your newest work?
2 years, probably.
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. It's 3 years, I guess, between publication dates. But again, it was building confidence. To sharing. My made up story, which is kind of made up and kind of not made up. So.
Right. So the next one is You Cannot Mess This Up: A True Story That Never Happened.
Right.
And it's set in the time period where I was growing up as a kid. And as we talked, there's so many things you brought up that made me spin back into my past and go, oh, and then this, and then this, and then this. I kept thinking about it after we had talked originally. But kind of set the premise for this. Did you intend to write a time travel book? Was that the first intention, or did that kind of develop as you wrote the book?
No, I intended, because the idea that I'd always had bouncing around my head was, and I like history. I like, I think people can be categorized. Would you rather go forward in time, or would you rather go back? I'm 100% go back. I like nostalgic vintage things. I like the Sears catalog and eBay. I have a metal
Yes.
detector. That's all my passion. So I was thought, and I think I'm funny. So I thought I'll write a really funny back in time book. So that's my entire intention. I wanted
Yeah.
to, and so I thought I'm going to write myself back to my own childhood. So the premise is traveling back home to Houston to, you know, attend some meetings about my parents' estate. My parents are both still living at the time when I wrote the book. But we have these meetings and we have to go to it. So somehow in the plane, I go back in time to 1978. And this guide tells me, you're, you're who you think you are. You're Amy Daughters of, 2000 and whatever. But these people, I'm going to take you to a place you have to go. You have to spend 36 hours there. And these people think you're their distant cousin from Ohio. They don't think you're, Amy, Weinland. That's my maiden name. So she drops me off in front of my childhood home, says it's Thanksgiving in 1978. Go in and I'll pick you up tomorrow at 5. And so when I get in the door, it's my parents are the same age as me, only they think I'm a cousin. My childhood 10-year-old self is there and she's off the chain. And my brother and sister are 12 and 8 in the book. And so it's 1978 and I have to survive without an iPhone for 36 hours with these people. And so what I didn't intend to do at all was to write a book about my feelings or emotions but I realized in the process of writing, of putting myself in this position as a character, I was going to have to reinvestigate the way I made these memories, the way I felt about my mother and my parents, the way I felt about my childhood self. And it turned out, Dave, that I wrote a catharsis without 100% not intending to.
Oh, okay. You mentioned to me that one of the scenes that you brought up when we talked, you're walking up to the front door and the front door opens and who's standing there?
It's my father, who's 40 something years old. And, he puts his hand out to shake it. And I'm like, oh my God, first of all, you're young. Second of all, you're pretty attractive. What's that about? Like no one told me, like, you're pretty good looking. And, he's all got his 70s situation, sideburns, the whole thing going on, the chest hair and all of it. I'm like, wait a second,
Dad? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, one thing I always kind of remember when I go back to anywhere that I grew up, everything looks smaller. Like the house looks smaller. It used to be huge. This place was humongous, and it's actually not that big. The yard's smaller. Everything seems different when you go back to your home where you grew up, because you just have this imagined reality of what life was like back then. But as an adult, you're like, this is not what I really thought it would be. Did you kind of write that into the book as well, your reaction to your home and all of that as well?
Right. And, I got incredible opportunity. I don't know if I shared this in the other call, but when I was writing the book and I was getting close to, it's probably 3/4 of the way of writing it, the home went up for sale. The childhood home went up for sale. And so I called the realtor, and I was living in Ohio at the time. And I said, I kind of posed as if somebody, I would like, maybe I'm moving home and I want to see the house. And I told her it was my childhood house, but I was interested because we were moving home within the next year. And she was like, absolutely. So somehow, and then I told my people, and so my mom and dad and my brother and sister and I went to the showing. And I got to walk, and the house had flooded. So, I mean, it had changed. Like, they had extended part of it, and a lot of it had changed because the house the entire thing had flooded. So a lot of the interior, but being in that space, being in the same space, especially with the same people, but that spatial understanding I got just of what you said made it a lot easier to write that part, because I got that gift of walking through those walls, and looking at the intercom system and some of the stuff that was still there. But like, I walked in the front door and had that same reaction you just said. And so I wrote that, wait a second, I could get to the end of this house that went on and on and on forever when I was 10 in about 5 big steps,
Right.
And I thought it was a mansion, and it turned out it's a nice house, but it wasn't a mansion.
Well, so for the reader then, who are you kind of writing this book towards? Who would be an ideal reader for? You cannot mess this up.
Well, I think, like you said, anyone in that age group, if you grew up in the 70s, if you grew up in the 60s, if you raised kids in the 70s, it's been marketed as women's, fiction, which it is. But I think I think the audience is I think there's definitely a male audience for it, because I think if you grew up in that era, but I've even had, I think that's the thing, somebody from 40 to 80 probably is the right age group, but we've had younger readers, of course,
Yeah.
because it's an introduction to the 70s for that person,
How much rewinding and research did you have to do to place all the characters and the scene and the house and the technology, all of that? Like, because we're so inundated with what we have today, we take for granted an email, a phone call, a text. That's just normal today. Internet, Google.
Right.
In 78, we didn't have things like that. So how much did you have to kind of deprogram how you see the world today so that you could write in that time period?
Right. And that's a great question because, and I write that in because she wants to, she's a writer in the, because really what this book is, it's a memoir wrapped in the tortilla of time travel. So it's a fiction, but when I wrote myself back, I kept trying to get my phone and take a note on it. I was like, I need to take notes. Like, why is Amy that skinny? And when did that happen? Like, when did we get to be bigger? Like, the size we are now. And why is, I had all these questions. And so I wrote in that I had this notebook that I carried around, that I had in my pocket, and I'd write notes. But every time I thought about when I wrote, I thought I'd use my phone somehow. I kind of wrote that in. That's how I deprogrammed. I was like, wait, you don't have a phone. Wait, you don't have a laptop. Wait, you can't contact anybody. Wait, you're on an island, and I wrote that in and imagining that, because there was the one side of imagining, all the vintage stuff. But like you said, one of the major components is imagining not having all the stuff we have now. And there's a great scene in the book where I try to write my younger self, a note before I leave. I'm going to write a note. I'm going to write something profound to this child version of myself, something that's going to, bridge the gap between my life now and her life then, or our life then. And so I sit down at this desk at my parents' house and I think immediately like, oh, a great quote from our president or like something from the Bible, all that would be great. But I was like, I can't Google anything. I'm going to have to rely on my own wits here. I cannot direct quote anything. I'm going to have to come up with something out of my head, or I'm going to have to run downstairs to the family encyclopedias, which I don't know that I could pull that off. And I could have used that information, but otherwise I was going to, and I think the line in the book is like, I realized that, intelligence is not based on your internet connection.
Yeah. And how would she read that? Like, what's an internet connection, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, but it did make me realize that we rely on that for our responses to things, to our, so before we had to be you had to call the library or have it in your head.
Or you got the one paragraph in the encyclopedia and that was enough. One paragraph on a certain topic where now you can travel to that place on your computer and virtually tour it. Like the world is so different, right? So that's very interesting. When you're writing the book, did you have any new memories that you had been disconnected from that came back to you in the process? You're like, oh, I never even remembered that thing happening, but now it's so real. Now that I'm writing, the intention of writing the book, I think, would generate some memories that maybe are long gone.
Oh, absolutely. It brought up all kinds of stuff. And then I realized that my younger self remembered it wrong, not because our memories are malleable, I think is the takeaway, because she didn't remember it wrong. She remembered it as a 10-year-old girl. Right. As a 40-something-year-old mother of two, I would have remembered it totally differently. So it wasn't her fault, but it did reshape the memories that I had. And I looked at my mother differently. Like she was just doing the best she could in the 70s, and I think I was the result in my real life was I was like, wait a second. I didn't, that's not the way I should have remembered it. I should, because that's not, I remembered it as a 10-year-old kid, but re-remembering it as an adult was a very freeing experience, and yes, I had new memories that got brought up by re-examining the old memories.
And like you said, when you saw your dad in the doorway, realizing that this father of yours is actually a human being, a male in his 40s, and he's a real person. He's not just a father figure. He's a real human being, and he only knows what he knows, and he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and he hasn't lived his whole life yet. And just putting some personality and humanity back into our parents, right?
Right. And they're, it's almost like you look at your parents' friends when they're growing up and you call them all Mr. and Mrs. this, and you realize they're just a bunch of screwed up human beings just like you are, and it kind of takes you off the hook though, because they weren't perfect. I didn't do it perfect. We all messed it up. But we were all trying hard, and we really didn't mess it up. We were just doing the best we could. And I think that's what I saw in both my parents in the story is these people were just doing the best they could, just like I'm doing the best you could. You're doing the
Yeah,
best you could.
right.
And that's where you cannot mess this up. I mean, it's a line in the book, but that's what it is. We can't mess this life up because if we do it with sincerity and we're trying to do the best we can in the circumstance we're in, and it was especially with my mother, who I had a difficult time with growing up, very common theme. I looked at her completely different after writing the book.
And and then the other part too, I guess, would just be the fact that we're all on this journey, and again, we don't know what we don't know, but we're just trying to do our best. And I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents to have all the answers and be everything our kids need, but really we can only do what we can do. And if we have a memory of our parents when we were little that they weren't quite enough, well, it's because they weren't quite enough,
Right.
because they didn't have all the tools and all the knowledge that maybe today we might have.
Right.
So they were trying to make it up as they go, and they just did their best.
Right. And they're trying to survive a career and a marriage. And I mean, all those things that are, we know to be difficult as adults, but they went through the same exact thing, and one of the takeaways for me was, oh my God, I hope my kids don't write a book where they go back in time and see me, exploding in the kitchen somewhere. They think that's hilarious, but I hope they don't do it.
Do you parent different now that you've written this book?
I think I did. I think, little Amy was the younger version of myself. She was definitely her own person. And that's one of the things I liked about writing the book, because I went from wanting to get away from her desperately to wanting to be her. I realized that I had lived a lot of the best parts away because, life does that to you. We conform and we do what we have to do. And I think I want to honor her, but I think it made me look at my children different because I wanted them to have the freedom to be themselves, just like my parents let little Amy be herself. I think it was inspiring to me. They tried to shut her down, but she just kept going. And I would look at my younger son, especially, is a lot like me. And when I was writing the book, I'd watch him. I'd be like, I just let him go. I mean, this kid's got it. Let's go. You're crazy. And I think it did. I think it did to maybe re-examine, that whole thing. And I think I did parent differently after that. And I think I looked at the outcome too, like all this happened and I still turned out okay. I mean, how we're going to frame what okay means, and they're going to have all kinds of twists and turns, and I'm not going to get it all the way right, but they're going to be okay. They're going to be themselves.
So no spoilers here, but was it hard to leave in the story? Was it hard for your character to leave the house after 36 hours?
Oh yeah. Cause I went from not wanting to be there
Right.
to realize if each of us could ever have that opportunity, regardless of the circumstances, there would be something so golden about it. And so by the time I got to the point where I had to write myself back to the future, I was sad because, and I realized that, she was only going to have this opportunity once, even though it was fictional. I kind of felt like it happened in a way because that was the profound impact from writing it. And one of the things I'm proudest of is people have read it who have told me they felt like they went back in time as well. Like they felt like they brought themselves back in time, because the thing you would do if you were to read this or think about it is you put yourself back into your own childhood in the same way. And they felt it was cathartic for them too. So yes, I was very sad to leave 1978.
What was fun to explore as a writer, as far as some of the toys, the decor, the music of that time frame that put you back into the scene? Was there anything that you were excited to include in the story that was a memory of yours that just made you happy to include that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, there's this scene in the book where my brother and sister and I play the Gong Show, which was a television series in the 70s, where it's like a talent show where you vote each other off. And there was a lot of things in that scene that were real pieces, toys we had, the record player, the Star Wars characters. My sister pulls the top of her canopy bed off like a microphone and plays the Grease soundtrack and dances around, and that scene's really nostalgic for me, but I really enjoyed the element of the research that it took to write the book. It was not work for me at all. It was just pure joy, spending the time in the library, going on YouTube. I bought Sears catalogs. I read everything I could from that week of Thanksgiving of 1978. And it was just pure joy. And there was so much we cut out because I loved it so much. I overdid it. And and that's the other thing. Like you said, you came off our last call thinking about what you remembered. And that's been a great joy for me too, having readers say, oh, what about this? And they remember their own things from 1978. It's been so fun to share those things.
Yeah, I love when an author brings us to a point where we could put ourselves into our own version of the story. So I'm going up to the front steps of my house in 1978.
Right.
My house is different than your house, but I'm having a similar experience in parallel with you at the same time. But I'm just living it through my lens as I read your book. And it's nice because it makes me then do some recounting and rethinking of where I've come from and how I would put myself into that story if I was in your role as the character in the book. So I love that you bring us all to that point where we can kind of diverge a little bit from your story and then, like I said, put ourselves into our own context and read the book through our own eyes. I love when an author can do that. I think that's a superpower.
Right. Well, that's very humbling. I think it is a good little not blueprint, but little guidebook almost to cathartic time travel, but with some humorous elements, for sure. But no, and I think that is amazing to me because that I did not think that would or could happen.
Right.
That journey for the reader.
Any repairs or realignment with you and your family through the process, your siblings, your parents? Was there any kind of indirect result of the book that was meaningful for you?
Well, I think it absolutely enhanced those relationships because I was so afraid. And I wasn't afraid about my siblings reading it because they thought it was hilarious. And they weren't really discussed in a super emotional way, other than I was jealous of my sister, which is still true. So, I mean, she got a lot of satisfaction about that, she was very happy with the whole thing. But my mom and dad, I think it really changed the way I looked at them. And I think there was a lot more respect and appreciation, especially for my mother, and I think that she bravely, because there's some sensitive things in there, she bravely has supported the book with nothing but grace, showed up at every single thing. But I think it absolutely, we now live in, more in the land of honesty than we did before, because I put it out there. We discussed it. She agreed and disagreed with things. But now it's like we're living in a new world where we're meeting each other in a different way. And she loved that I saw her through the lens of a similar aged woman, suburban woman. I looked at her and thought, my dad's a great guy, but is this what she wants to do? Like, she's living the dream in suburbia, but is that what she wants? And how did she get everyone's underwear cleaned and put away in between all these things? Like, how is she doing that? And I think she looked at herself differently because of it,
Right.
And I think that can do nothing but enhance a relationship.
And to go back to what you said at the beginning, being over in the UK, your partner's off at work, your kid is off to school, and you're home by yourself. Like, what am I going to do with myself? You're similar, your mom, right? All your kids go off to school, her husband goes off to work. Where's my identity now? So there's a little bit of a parallel even there between you and your mother.
Oh, yeah. And she didn't have the opportunities that we have now, as women to explore, like, what are you going to do, Amy? Let's do something great. My mom had this typewriter and she's a wordsmith. She wanted to write about Hollywood and, that's what she wanted to do, but no one encouraged her to do that. Not one person, which she would have had to have. And she had a lot of fortitude, but, there was not those avenues where, we all try to investigate what we can go do. There was none of that. There wasn't it for men either. You were expected to go and do what you were supposed to do.
Right. Amazing. So for the reader, Amy, as we kind of wrap up here, the reader, they're going to have a copy of You Cannot Mess This Up in their hands. They're going to read it for the first time. Your love letter, your message to them as a reader, first time coming to you as an author, first time they're going to read your work. What would you say to them? What's your message to the reader?
Well, I would say, I hope you're ready to go on a fantastic journey, back in time with me. I hope you laugh, out loud as loud as you can. But I hope that, you're inspired to, take your own past and your life seriously and realize that it matters profoundly. That we're not necessarily going to be on the Oprah show, but it matters profoundly to you and the people who loved you enough to share, enough to investigate, enough to reflect on, enough to, look back on. And like you said, spend time thinking about, what it means to you internally and how you can, improve your relationship with yourself and other people in your family by considering it.
So the last thing I noticed on the website too, for the book, you can buy it on Bookshop. You can buy it on Amazon. You can also listen on Audible. Is this true?
That's right.
So are you voicing the book?
It's true, and I'm the reader.
Oh, good. Okay.
I voiced the book on Audible. Yeah, and so it's not your professional audio. It is a professional production, but I'm just saying I'm not a voice actress. But yeah, it's my voice. So, and I like it because the story's so personal. For me to tell it, it's honored to have been able to do the Audible version. Yeah. But that's my voice and my words. So,
wow, was that fun to record then, though?
Oh yeah, and it was surreal. And there's a couple scenes, that about me having my period or whatever. Yeah. And there's this 20-year-old sound engineer sitting on the other side of the screen looking at me, and I was like, one of us has to turn away for this part. And then I think I'm funny, so we had to edit out some of my thinking I was funny even after I'd written the book and read it 100 times. But yeah, so I mean, it was great to do, and they did a great job of working with me as a non-professional. But what an absolute joy it was to read it.
Excellent, Amy. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm curious to see where this leads you in the future. My podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. So one last question. How are you, now that all these great books are in the world, how are you living your next chapter? Kind of what are you looking forward to in the future as a writer?
Yeah, I speak about letter writing, like handwritten letters because of Dear Dana. But I want to write a humorous historical fiction book. So that's probably my next chapter. That's what I'm working on right now. But just I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continue to write and to see where that creativity takes me.
Excellent. Amy, thank you so much for doing this. Congratulations on 2 great books in the world. Many more to come. Just talking to you, I know there's great things ahead for you. And thank you for bringing us back in time to a time that I really love too, and I miss dearly. But to be able to have a chance to travel back with you, I think this was really great. Thank you for taking us on this trip along with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and letting me share my stories with your listeners. And it's just a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Everyone, all the information, as always, in the show notes. Go over there, grab a copy of both books we talked about today. Leave a review for both books as well. I'm sure Amy would love to hear your thoughts about what she's written and what you've read. That means a lot to our authors as well. Amy, again, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Dave. Appreciate it.
Hey, as we exit the podcast, as we leave out the door, I know the car's running. Somebody's eagerly waiting for you to get out there and go home. As we exit the podcast, I just want to ask if you have time. I would truly appreciate it. We ask for you to do this for our authors. When you buy your book, we ask you to leave a review. Why? Because it means a lot to the author and it tells other people that the book is great. Now, you don't hear me ask for this very often, so I'm going to do this here because we're friends, right? You and I are friends. I would love a review of this show because it'll tell more people to come and listen to this podcast. So if you have Apple, wherever you're listening, there's probably some way to give a star rating or leave a comment about the show. YouTube, you can always leave comments on YouTube. Every episode's there. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a review, leave a rating, and share this with somebody. That's probably the best way to grow the podcast is for you to share it. And by listening to the end of the episode, like you're doing right now, tells all the apps this is a good podcast. So thank you for already helping me by listening to this part. But go leave a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for being part of the podcast family. Take care.